Good evening. Today is May 17th. This is our second service. Our first service in this morning got interrupted. Three of our babies, our mama, our papa, and the only born of our previous clutch, were all sitting on the same cord, and my YouTube station went off. As it turned out, it was the computer that went off, and I don't know if it was birds or me or the electricity or something happened, but we didn't get that. So we're in our afternoon service. In the afternoon, we're in the New Testament, and we're talking about Paul, and we are in the 23rd chapter. But be aware that I am doing two things at once, and so sometimes I don't do it right. But you'll understand. We are on iblog.tv/user/preacherwithparrots. On Sunday nights, we're in the New Testament. On Wednesday nights, we're in the Old Testament. And on Sunday mornings, whatever I happen to be doing. Right now, Sunday mornings is all about what sin is. Okay, we were in chapter 23 before we closed last Sunday. Paul was getting ready to go to Rome. Do you folks that have kept up with me, do you recall that there was a prophet that while Paul was on his way, he was coming from Macedonia, which is in the northern part of Greece, and they and other people in Greece, and then all along the various countries which are located in a place which is now called Turkey and is on the northern border of the Mediterranean, where Israel is on the eastern border, and just north of them is Syria. As Paul was getting ready to go to Rome, to Jerusalem, he was hoping to go to the Feast of Pentecost this year, and it was something that I had planned on going to, but I have an ear problem. And flying, since it, by the way, at the end of the week, I'll be having a more delicate scan than I had before, and the doctors will know for sure at the end of this week exactly about the ear problem, but it didn't make good sense for me to go to Jerusalem. But this year, for my 84th birthday present to myself, I was planning on going to Jerusalem to celebrate the Feast of Pentecost. In the book of Acts, in chapters 1 and 2, the disciples were celebrating the Feast of Passover. The Feast of Pentecost. P-E-N-T-E in front of a word always means 5 or 50. The Feast of Passover was the feast that was being celebrated. You remember they had to hurry and take Jesus off the cross because there was going to be a feast day that would begin when the sun went down that night. Well, that was Passover. 50 days after that was a Jewish feast, which was similar to Thanksgiving. But because it was 50 days, pentagram is a 5-sided figure. Pentecost means 50 days. So they were at the feast of 50 days after the main celebration, which was Passover. At that time, the Holy Spirit fell and filled the hearts and lives of the disciples and about 120 other people who were there at the time. this year, in our calendar, which is the Gregorian calendar, Feast of Pentecost comes on May 20th to 25th. So I would have been leaving in the morning had I not been detained. Now, if all goes well with my ear, who knows? I might still make it to Jerusalem this summer. And if I do, I'll certainly do my programs from there. No problem. It won't be on the actual Feast of Pentecost, but I guess that doesn't make any difference. But it just so happened that Paul, he was carrying offerings, money, that different churches had given him to give to the disciples in Jerusalem, because they had financial difficulties due to lack of rain and so forth. So the various churches, most of the churches were part Jews and part Gentile Christians and part Jewish Christians who had accepted Christ as Messiah. So Paul had just gotten through saying he was going to go to Jerusalem for the Feast of the Pentecost, and it was a prophet that came. And he took a girdle that had been kind of like some of the larger scarves that women wear as a shawl or as a head covering now. And he took it and he prophesied over it. He took the shawl and he wrapped it around his own arms, and he said, "This is what the Lord says about the one that this shawl belongs to. This person will be bound. And things don't look good for this person. This person should not go where they're planning on going." So all of the people cried and begged Paul, "Don't go. I mean, the prophet says something terrible is going to happen to you." But Paul had the opportunity to do something for God that very few of us ever get a chance of doing. It's not likely the Queen of England's going to come and ask me to have tea with her and give her my testimony. It's not likely that the head of one of the Arabian countries, like Saudi maybe, would ask me to go preach in their town or village or city. But sometimes a person happens to be in a position that just because of who they are and when they're in a certain place, a certain opportunity arises. And Paul was a Roman citizen. Paul was falsely accused. Paul could have asked for a trial and gotten it and won. Anywhere in the then known world. It was Roman government. The Roman government was the world government at the time. But because Paul uniquely was a Roman citizen, and most of the people in Israel, very few people were, he could demand, "You can't treat me that way. I'm an American citizen. You can't come into this country and do something to me. I have rights. Well, everybody should have them, but I'm in a position to demand my rights." So Paul demanded to be heard by Caesar. That meant when he got up to tell his story, and it wasn't like Judge Judy where she asked questions and you answered. You get to tell your story. And when any of them ever gave their testimony, they'd get up and say who they were, what their life had been like. If they were a Christian, they would tell how they happened to meet the Lord, give their heart to the Lord, what he had done for them. Paul's now about to have this chance. If you had a chance to speak to the world leader about what Jesus had done for you personally, would you give up that chance? Of course not. Especially knowing that maybe nobody else alive could have done that. Maybe nobody with Paul's background and Paul's experiences would have happened to have been falsely charged and would have happened to be a Roman citizen, would happen to have the education and understanding that Paul did, and know how to comport himself in various situations. So Paul said no, regardless of the danger, he would go. All right. Going back to a couple of the verses we did last Sunday in Acts chapter 23, verse 23. He called unto him 2 centurions. A centurion, you remember from the death of Jesus, is a Roman soldier that is in charge of 100 men. You know, centurion, century, 100. So there were 2 soldiers. That meant 200 soldiers and 2 leaders. There were 70, that's 20, 40, 60, 70 spearmen, men with spears, and it was the 3rd hour of the night. Let's assume it gets dark at 6. It would be about 9 at night. The religious rulers were trying to kill Paul off the same way they did Jesus. Their plan was, they knew what Paul was going to do. Their plan was to hide. He had to be taken from one city to another. There was 2 ways of traveling. He was going to go to Rome from Israel. Certain times of the year you could go by boat. Certain times of the year, because the boat traveled by wind. So it had to be at a time of the year when there was wind, and it had to be when the wind was pushing boats in the direction you wanted to go, and you could go by land. Their plan was to hide out by land and kill him as they passed by. They put Paul on a beast, probably a donkey, maybe a camel. And they sent a letter to Felix, who was the governor. He's going to appear before Felix, and Festus, and Agrippa. He's going to have lots of opportunities to give his testimony. Claudius Lysias addressed Felix, and he said, he greets him, and he says, this man was taken of the Jews. In other words, the Jews grabbed him. And he should have been killed by them. But I came along with my army, and I rescued him, because I knew he was a Roman soldier. He was a Roman, and rescued him, having understood that he was a Roman. So I did Rome, and I did you, and I did him. I did everybody a big favor. I'm a great Roman. And when I would have known the cause wherefore they accused him, I brought him forth unto their counsel. See, you don't have to go to the number one guy for everything. If you're accused of stealing a package of cigarettes, you don't have to go to the Supreme Court. He said, you know, this could have been settled. This is by them. The Romans ruled the world, but they allowed the Jews to keep their own religion and settle things. It's kind of like what you hear some of the people talking now about Sharia law. Oh, why bother the American government? If we have two people and one of them is accusing his fellow person of the same religion of a little religious crime, why do we want to bother the U.S. government? Let's just handle it by Sharia law. And this is what the Roman government was allowing the Jews to do. Oh, you accused him of lying and you want to hit him 5 times? Okay, hit him 5 times. No big deal. Oh, you got a guy that you say he blasphemed. Oh, terrible, terrible sin, blaspheme. And you want to throw him in jail for a year. Okay, throw him in jail for a year. No problem. If it was something that they considered among your own religion, your own culture, settle it. This same thing happened at the time of the death of Jesus. If the leaders of the temple could have killed Jesus, they would. They were accusing him of saying he was the Son of God. You'd think the Romans cared whether he said he was the Son of God, or they could care less. But they wanted to kill him for it. And the Romans said, you don't have that authority. Only Rome can take a man's life. So a similar thing is happening now. You want to accuse him of something? No big deal. But the man says he's a Roman, and he demands to be heard of Caesar. Now it's another matter. Now it's not for you to say, it's just a little deal. And when I knew the cause, I would have brought him to their council. I would have said, okay, Jews, take care of it. When I perceived to be accused of questions of their law, that I had nothing to lay to charge worthy of death or of his bonds, according to our Roman law, of which I am a soldier, he hasn't done anything worthy of death. Even what they're accusing him of, if it's true, you don't get death for it, and you don't get chained, you don't get bound for it. And I went straightway to you, and I gave commandments to his accusers, and said, what do you have against him? And the soldiers said they took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. And this is where we ended last Sunday. Now, who, when they came to Caesarea and delivered the epistle to the governor, an epistle is a letter. We have the epistle to the Galatians. We have the epistle to the 1st and 2nd Corinthians. An epistle is a letter. And so when they would take a prisoner or they had property or whatever, there's something written that goes with it. And so along with Paul, there was a letter. It said, on the morrow, they left the horsemen to go with him, and they returned to the castle. Who, when they came to Caesarea and delivered the epistle, the letter, to the governor, they presented Paul with him. So here's the governor. Here come the soldiers. They got the letter. They got Paul. And when the governor read the letter, he said, what province are you from? You know, in the states, we have the states. In Canada and other places, they have provinces. And he said, what province are you from? Remember what they did with Jesus? Remember that when Pilate was going to try him, he remembered that somebody from Jesus' hometown happened to be visiting in the city and thought maybe he'd like to get in on this. Well, something very similar was happening here. He said, what province are you from? And he heard he was from Cilicia. He said, I will hear you. And when your accusers are come, and he commanded him to be kept in Herod's judgment hall. So now we're in chapter 24, and he's going to be heard by Felix. I hope this lasts as long as the clock does here, because I'm really thirsty. After 5 days, Ananias, the high priest, now he's in Herod's judgment hall, waiting around for Felix to hear him. And after 5 days, Ananias, the high priest, same high priest when Jesus was tried. This was a few years later. And with a certain orator, a speaker, public speaker, named Tertullus, who informed the governor against Paul. He made a statement against him. And when he was called forth, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, seeing that by thee we enjoy great quietness, and that very worthy deeds are done unto this nation by thy providence. Ah, you're somebody important. We accept it always and in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness. Notwithstanding that I be not further tedious unto thee, I really don't want to bug you and bother you, Mr. Felix. That you would hear us out of the clemency a few words. Just give us a few words. For we have found this man a pestilent, a bothersome person. Ooh, don't bring me a bothersome person. I pray thee that thou wouldst hear us out of the clemency a few words. Just be patient and let us say a couple of words. For we have found this man a pestilent fellow, and a mover of sedition among all the Jews throughout the world. Throughout the whole world, this guy is bugging the Jews. We can't have that. He's a mover of sedition among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. Who were the Nazarenes? Well, Jesus was from Nazareth. He was often called a Nazarene. And those of his regular followers, see, he didn't have just 12 disciples. There were many that followed him. Sometimes 25, sometimes a few hundred, sometimes 5,000. And they were referred to as Nazarenes, or sometimes as followers of the Nazarenes. Who also has gone to profane the temple. Remember last Sunday I said that he went in to pay a vow in the temple, cut his hair and make some religious promises. And they accused him of causing a riot just by being there. He went to profane the temple. And we would have judged him according to his law. We wouldn't be here bothering you. Yeah, we would have settled it. But the chief captain Lysias came upon us, and with great violence took him out of our hands. He just grabbed him. We would have tried him and settled it, but he grabbed him right out of our hands. Commanding his accusers to come unto thee. They said, you got an accusation? You go to Mr. Felix. Whom thyself mayest take knowledge of all these things whereof we accuse him. And the Jews also assented. In other words, the Jews said, amen, that's right, we agree. Verse 10. Then Paul, after that, the governor had beckoned unto him. Come on, speak. He said, for as much as I know that you've been many years a judge unto this nation, I do the more cheerfully answer for myself. So Paul said, I know you're somebody. And I'm real glad to be able to personally, not through a letter or another speaker, I'm glad to be able to speak to you. Because you may understand. And are yet but 12 days since I went up to the temple to worship. It's only less than 2 weeks ago I went to the temple. So how much trouble could we be talking about here? And he said, you may understand, because Festus, or Felix, had certain learning. He knew about Jewish law, and he knew about prophets. He knew the prophecies and the law. So he pretty much understood Jewish religion and would know if in fact Paul had broken Jewish law. He said, it's only been 12 days. They neither found me in the temple disputing with anybody. There wasn't even so much as an argument. Neither raising up the people. I wasn't, hey, come on over here, everybody listen. I wasn't doing that. Neither in the synagogue or in the city. I'm inside the temple. In the synagogue, which is not the temple, but because it was only one temple, and not everybody could go from wherever they lived in the world to the temple. A synagogue was any place where 10 male Jews could get together and perform their religious rites. So he said, I wasn't in the city, wasn't in the temple, I wasn't in the synagogue. Neither can they prove the things whereof they accuse me. It's just so much talk. They have no proof. But this I confess to thee. But I am going to admit to something, sir. I didn't do the stuff they're accusing me of. But there is something that I did do. This I confess unto you. The way, what they call heresy, so worship I the God of my fathers. Now he's a Jew. He happens to be preaching to Gentiles, but he's a Jew. He said, and you understand, in the God of my fathers, I worship him. And I believe the things that are written in the law, and I believe the things that are written in prophecy. And he knows, Felix knows the law and prophecy. And have hope toward God that they themselves also allow that there shall be a resurrection of the dead. Here we go. Paul's got him again. The Sanhedrin is made up of some Pharisees and some Sadducees. And the Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection. They don't believe anybody ever raised anybody from the dead, or ever would, or that Jesus was resurrected, or that ever would be, or it just, nobody, never, didn't happen. And so he's got two kinds of people are accusing him, but he is touching a subject on which they can't agree. Neither can they prove the things whereof They accuse me. They have hope, and I have hope in God, which they themselves allow. There shall be a resurrection of the dead, both of the just and the unjust. O Felix, I know the word. And the word said the day will come when there will be a resurrection. Some of those will be just good people. Others will be unjust bad people. But there will be a resurrection of the dead. And herein do I exercise myself to have always a conscience void of offense toward God and toward men. And me, knowing the day will come when God will raise us all from the dead, whether we're good people or bad people. We will all stand before him. And Paul says, I'm standing here before him. And he says, my conscience is void of offense. There's nothing on my conscience that I've done wrong toward God or toward anybody. Now, after many years, I come to bring alms to my nation and offerings. He's a Jew. He's a Roman citizen, but he is a Jew. And he said, I came to bring money offerings to the Jews, to my nation. I ain't coming to do anything wrong to them. I came to bring them some money, alms, to help them out. Whereas certain Jews from Asia, these were the Judaizers, the ones that did not believe Jesus was Messiah. And they would go to the synagogues because the Jews who did believe Jesus was Messiah also went to the synagogue. And these Judaizers would go and speak against Jesus. He says, certain Jews from Asia found me purified in the temple. I was there doing a Jewish religious act, neither with multitude nor with tumult. I didn't have a bunch of people gathered around me watching me. There was no problem. They ought to be here before you. Where are they? If there's anybody that says I created a nuisance in Jerusalem, why aren't they here? Why are these guys here with a letter? Where are the witnesses who ought to be here before you? And they ought to object if they've got anything against me. Or else let these same ones here if they have found me doing anything wrong. Okay, so the guys that say they saw me doing something in Jerusalem, they aren't here. Okay, the ones that are here, let them say that what was found wrong when I stood before the council and they saw it. Let them tell you what they find me, what wrongdoing did they find me guilty of. Except, now, if I'm guilty of anything, it is this one voice that I cried standing among them, touching the resurrection of the dead. I am called in question by you today. Okay? If there's a problem with believing that the dead will be resurrected, tell me, Felix, how do you feel about it? You judge me on that. And when Felix heard these things, verse 22, having more perfect knowledge of that way, Felix knew the law and Felix knew prophecy. He deferred them and said, when Lysias, the chief captain, shall come down, I will know the utmost of your matter. When this other person comes, I'll know the details. And he commanded a centurion, a man in charge of 100 military men, to keep Paul and to let him have liberty. Not lock him up, not chain him up. Just know where he was. And that he should forbid none of his acquaintances to minister or come unto him. Later on, when Paul is in jail in Rome, he's allowed to have his friends bring him food. minister unto him. If he's not feeling well, bring him medicine. And so he's going to be now held, but he's going to be at liberty. And if any of his friends want to come and minister to him, pray for him, bring him a change of clothes, bring him some better food to eat, they can't stop that. After certain days, when Felix comes with his wife Drusilla and with a Jewess, somebody they knew, he sent for Paul. You know, it's kind of like if you knew somebody important and you know that a certain actor or a certain singer or a certain important person was going to be in a certain place, you might say, could you fix it so I could go? Could you get me tickets? You know, you got the power. Could you arrange it? Well, they knew that she kind of was interested. So Drusilla, who was a Jewess, sent for Paul and heard concerning the faith in Christ. And as he reasoned of righteousness, you know, right living, right behaving, of temperance, temperance is not drinking, overdoing, Captain, I wonder what's going on down there. This is pretty unusual. Temperance and judgment to come, Felix trembled. They all listened. Felix trembled. This is an important verse. You might want to remember it. It's in, this is, by the way, 58 AD. Jesus' death was about 35. 55. So we got about 25 years after Christ's death. Still very fresh in people's minds. Felix is hearing all of this. He's a Jew. He knows the law. He knows the prophets. Felix trembled. This is Acts 24, 25. He trembled. And he said, go thy way for this time. Just for now, leave me. That's cute, isn't it? It's cute. Just leave for right now. When I have a convenient time, I'll call for you. This man is under conviction. He has just had the gospel presented to him. And there are all kinds of people. He's the most important person there. We're going to hear what some of the others said, but this is what Felix said. Leave for right now. And when I find a convenient time, I'm going to have you back. We're going to continue this conversation. He hoped also that money should have been given him of Paul. I mean, you can always hope. Paul's got this money. He's had taken, or had money that he had taken from some Christians in Greece and other places to the Jewish Christians who were suffering famine in Jerusalem. He was kind of hoping that he'd be offered a little money. And then he could say, oh, okay, and turn him loose. He was thinking, oh, he wants to talk about the Lord. Maybe we talk about the Lord later. Maybe he'll give me money for turning him loose, and I'll turn him loose. Wherefore he sent for him the oftener and communed with him. But after 2 years, you think the government runs things slowly now? I thought my doctors were taking forever to pay attention to my request for a referral to a specialist. This was 2 years. Porcius Festus came into Felix's room, and Felix, wanting to show the Jews a pleasure, just wanting to do something to make the Jews happy for a reason, he was willing to show the Jews pleasure, and he left Paul bound. In other words, tied up. And now Paul goes before Festus and Agrippa. And now we're in chapter 25. Paul is undoubtedly preaching to whoever he sees. When he's in jail, he preaches to other jailers or to other prisoners. Paul didn't wait. I guarantee you, Paul didn't waste 2 years in jail. And he was given liberty, and he was allowed to have others attend to his needs. Now, when Festus came into the province, after 3 days, he ascended from Caesarea to Jerusalem. Then the high priest, now we're back in Jerusalem. Remember the idea about which the prophet happened to know. The idea was, while Jesus was being moved to talk to one Roman leader to the other, while they were moving him, they would jump them in the middle of the night and kill him. Now the high priest and the chief of the Jews informed him against Paul and besought him. This is Festus. So now the high priests are getting involved. They bring the subject of Paul up and desired favor against him, that he would send for him to Jerusalem, laying wait in the way to kill him. They were saying, oh, well, maybe they'll just send him over here, and on the way we'll kill him. But Festus answered that Paul should be kept at Caesarea, and that he himself would depart shortly thither. Pretty soon he would go there. Let them therefore, said he, which among you that are able, go down with me, and accuse this man, if there be any wickedness in him. All you that got something against him, you know some terrible thing he's done, come go with me, and you can testify of it there. By the way, remember that the 10 Commandments, many people think the 10 Commandments say thou shalt not lie. It says thou shalt not bear false witness. It was this kind of false witness, lying in a government trial or lying in court, which could get a man killed. If your lie was seen as truth, evidence against him, an innocent man could lose his life or be put in jail and lose his liberty. So that's what giving or bearing false witness is. And when he had tarried among them more than 10 days, they went down to Caesarea, and the next day, sitting on the judgment seat, commanded Paul to be brought. Okay, I'm here now. I'm sitting in my chair. I'm on the bench. Bring me Paul. And when he was come, the Jews which came down from Jerusalem stood round about. And many laid many grievous complaints against Paul, which they could not prove. Now, you can say whatever you want to say. If you don't have proof, It's your word against somebody else's. And that's not testimony. That's testimony. That's not proof. So while they went down and they testified, they didn't have any proof. They stood about. They laid many grievous complaints against Paul, which they could not prove, while he answered for himself. He didn't have an attorney. Nobody stood. They accused him. He would answer. Neither against the temple nor against Caesar have I offended anything at all. Against Caesar, that would be a political, a legal matter. Against the temple, that would have been a cultural, religious matter over which the Romans could care less. But Festus wanted to make the Jews happy. As I've said before, if a person has a job working in a prison of watching over the prisoners, if you can treat them nice, they're easier to handle. They're less apt to have a riot. They're less apt to start a fight in the dining room or to throw food at each other. So sometimes, even though you're the head guy and they should be respecting you, sometimes you give in and make the little guys happy. Festus, wanting to do the Jews a pleasure, said, "Wilt thou go up to Jerusalem to be judged of these things?" Well, we're a long way from Rome. So we're not that far from Jerusalem. Are you willing to go and have the matter settled there? And I'll be the judge? Verse 10, Paul said, I stand at Caesar's judgment. Not you in Jerusalem, but the man who rules the world will be my judge. Where I ought to be judged. To the Jews I've done no wrong, as you well know. For if I be an offender, or if I've committed anything worthy of death, I refuse not to die. I'm willing to die. Prove what I've done and kill me. But if there be none of these things whereupon they accuse me of, no man may deliver me unto them. I appeal unto Caesar. Let me mark that in this particular Bible so that when I want to find it again fast, I can. I appeal unto Caesar. Acts 25:11. I appeal to Caesar. And he's a Roman citizen. He can do it. Then Festus, when he conferred with the council, he said, Hast thou appeared unto Caesar? Appealed to Caesar? You'll go. You want to be tried by Caesar? You're going to be tried by Caesar. Paul has known this in his heart for a few years. One of the few people that can pull this off. One of the few people that can say, I appeal to Caesar. I want the Supreme Court. I mean, you get a parking ticket. You can't say, I appeal to the Supreme Court. Can't do it. But he was accused big time of stuff they couldn't prove. And he was a Roman citizen. And he had been in all these little things. 2 years he'd waited already. I appeal to Caesar. You going to go to Caesar? You'll go to Caesar. And after days, the King Agrippa and Bernice came on to Caesarea to salute Festus. They came to say, hey, Festus. And when they'd been there many days, Festus declared Paul's cause unto the king, saying, there's a certain man left in bonds by Felix. The previous guy in charge that was here left a prisoner behind, about whom, when I was in Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders and the Jews informed me, desiring to have judgment against him. Oh, when I was in Jerusalem, they just begged me to come and be the judge and hear the case. To whom I answered, it is not the manner of the Romans to deliver any man to die. We just don't kill somebody for no reason. Before that which he is accused, have the accusers face to face. He has a right to have those people that are accusing him come and stand and look him right in the eyeballs and make their accusation. And have license to answer for himself concerning the crime laid before him. Therefore, when they came over here without any delay on the morrow, I sat on the judgment seat, and I commanded the man to be brought forth. Against whom, when the accusers stood up, they brought none accusation of such things as I supposed. I thought they had really had proof, and they had nothing, but had certain questions against him of their own superstitious, religious, non-important, non-political stuff. Certain questions against their own superstition, and of one Jesus, who was dead, whom Paul says is alive. Paul doesn't even know if the man, this religious person, is alive or dead. And because I doubted such manner of questions, I asked him if he would go to Jerusalem and be judged there. But when Paul appealed to be reserved unto the hearing of Augustus Caesar, his full name, so I might send him to Caesar. Then Agrippa said unto Festus, I would also hear the man myself. Hey, I'd like to be his judge. Tomorrow, said he, you'll hear him. Boy. And on the morrow, when Agrippa was come, and Bernice with great pomp, she was going to put on her best clothing and get her hair done. And she was going to march in, and she was going to sit in a comfortable chair, and probably pillows behind her, making her comfortable in all of this. And was entered into the palace of hearing with the chief captains and principal men of the city. At Festus' commandment, Paul was brought forth. Can't you see him and Bernice entering in, and her getting all ready to go? And when everybody's, he raises and he says, bring him to me. And Festus said, King Agrippa and all men that are here present with us, you see this man, about whom the multitude of the Jews have dealt with me. Oh, millions of Jews have come to me complaining. And also here, crying that he ought not to live any longer. But when I found that he had committed nothing worthy of death, and that he himself had appealed to Augustus, I have determined to send him, of whom I have no certain thing to write unto my Lord. I'm not making any complaints. I can't write nothing down. I got nothing to say. Wherefore I brought him forth to you, and specialty before thee, O King Agrippa, that after examination had, I might have something to write. I've got nothing I can write down. I can't make any report. But, oh, King Agrippa, you hear him. And when you get through hearing him, whatever you say, tell me, and I'll have something to write down in my report. For it seemed to me unreasonable to send a prisoner, and not withal to signify the crimes laid against him. Remember when they brought him earlier, I said he came with an epistle He came with a letter. Here's the prisoner. This is what he's done. Well, he said, I can't send a man to Rome with no letter, with nothing written down. So maybe, O King Agrippa, you can suggest something and I'll write it down. Now we go to chapter 26. We're covering a lot of ground. And we're covering a lot of years. Then King Agrippa said to Paul, you're permitted to speak for yourself. Paul stretched forth his hand and answered for himself. I think myself happy, King Agrippa, because I shall answer for myself this day before you, touching all the things whereof I am accused of the Jews. I couldn't be happier, King Agrippa, because I'm here standing in your worthy presence. And all the things that these Jews have said against me that aren't true, I get to talk to you about it now. Especially because I know you are an expert in all customs and questions that are among the Jews. They're just not some Nazarenes or Galileans. You know what the Jews believe. Wherefore I beseech thee, hear me patiently. It might take a little bit of time, but listen to me carefully. My manner of life, oh boy, this is, I was born poor. This is how I grew up. This is the life I've lived. My manner of life from my youth, which was at the first among my own nation at Jerusalem, know all the Jews. All the Jews know what my life as a young person, as a child, and as a youth. All the Jews in Jerusalem know what kind of kid I was. They knew me from the beginning. If I would testify that after the most straightest sect of our religion, I lived a Pharisee. He was a father and his father was a Pharisee. You can't get more religious than that. They required, it isn't, be a good boy if you want to be a good boy. If you're a Pharisee, you are good. After the most strictest sect of our religion, I lived as a Pharisee. And now I stand and I'm judged for the hope of the promise made by God to our fathers. I'm being judged now because God made a promise to our fathers, the Jews. He's laying it on. He's not only a Roman citizen, he is a good Jew. So how dare these Jews accuse him of something? Unto which promise are 12 tribes. Oh boy, here we come, Jewish history. 12 tribes instantly serving God day and night. We hope to come. For which hope's sake, King Agrippa, I'm accused of the Jews. Why should it be thought such an incredible thing with you that God would raise the dead? Surely you don't think it's a big deal that I would say God would raise the dead. Right, King? You wouldn't think that's incredible. I verily thought with myself that I ought to do many things contrary to the name of Jesus of Nazareth. He said, I was such a good Jew that I was against Jesus. And remember that when in chapter 9 of Acts he becomes a Christian, it is because he is on his way looking for Christians that he can arrest. He said, I went to Damascus with authority and commission from the chief priests. Chief priests gave me permission to bring Christians back, bound, and to have them tried. How much better a Jew could a person be? At midday, that's noon, O king, I saw in the way of the light in heaven above the brightness of the sun shining around about me and them that journeyed with me. And when we were all fallen to the ground, I heard a voice saying unto me in the Hebrew tongue, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Is it hard for you to kick against the pricks? This was what he's talking. We've talked about the animals and the yoke. And this is now when the animals resist doing what their owners want them to do. And they kick. And the damage they do is to themselves, not to what they kick. And I said, who art thou, Lord? And if you're hearing a voice from heaven and you've been knocked to the ground, you don't act like you're somebody. You act like somebody else is there that's somebody. But rise and stand upon your feet. For I have appeared unto you for this purpose, to make you a minister and a witness both of these things which you've seen and those things that I will appear unto you. He said, I heard this voice, and Jesus said, you're going to be a minister. And you're going to tell people about this. You heard a voice from heaven. You're going to tell people this, what you already know, and you're going to preach to people what you don't know yet, but I'm going to teach you, and then you preach it. Delivering thee from the people and from the Gentiles, unto whom now I send you. Let me check. I'm looking at the time. Okay. We're going to come to a good ending pretty soon. At a good time. It'll be 5 minutes or so. We're going to make it. Delivering thee from the people and from the Gentiles to whom I now send you. This is God talking to Paul, telling him what he's going to do with him. I'm going to send you to Gentiles and to open their eyes and to turn them from darkness to light and from the power of Satan unto God, and that they may receive forgiveness of sins and inheritance among them which are sanctified by faith that is in me. Paul's still talking to Agrippa about what happened to him on the road to Damascus. Whereupon, O King Agrippa, I was not disobedient to the heavenly vision. I got this heavenly vision. God says, I'm sending you, I'm making you a preacher. I wasn't disobedient. In other words, I obeyed. But I showed first unto them at Damascus and Jerusalem, and throughout the coasts of Judea, and then to the Gentiles of God to do the works meet for repentance. He said, I didn't just go off. He said, first of all, I was on my way to Damascus. I went to Damascus. He actually went to church in there. He gave his testimony, preached. They believed him. And when many, many Jews were afraid of him, the people in Damascus, Syria, were not, because they saw his sincerity. So he tells them about it. He said, the things I did in Jerusalem, many of the saints that I shut up in prison, having received authority from the chief priests, and when they were put to death, I gave my voice against them. I testified against them so they could be killed. And I punished them often in every synagogue, and I compelled them to blaspheme. And being exceedingly mad against them, I persecuted them even in strange cities. I just went anywhere persecuting Jews. At midday, O king, sorry, I'm in the wrong column. About therefore obtained help from God. I was in the right column. The Jews caught me in the temple and were about to kill me. But I went to Damascus and I showed myself to the people there, and then the Jews tried to kill me. But God helped me, and I continue to today witnessing to small and great. One little kid on the side of the road that wants to hear me, or 100 people in the synagogue. I'll witness, I'll preach the truth to anybody that wants to hear me, saying none other things than those which the prophets and Moses said would happen. What I'm preaching is what Moses preached. Are you against what Moses preached? That Christ would suffer and that he would be the first that would raise from the dead and would show light unto the people and to the Gentiles. And as he spoke for himself, Festus said with a loud voice, Paul, remember what Felix said? Felix said, Paul, I'm not ready right now, but when I am, I'll call for you. Maybe I'll be a Christian later, just not today. Well, Festus said with a loud voice, Paul, you're beside yourself. Much learning's made you mad. I said, Paul, you're crazy. You spend too much time in the library. You've always got a book in your hand. You're always studying. You're always taking notes. You're always getting ready to preach. You have studied so hard, you have driven yourself crazy. And he said, I'm not mad, most noble Festus, but I speak forth the words of truth and soberness. For the king knoweth of these things before whom I speak freely. I'm persuaded that none of these things are hidden from him. God knows everything that's going on. And King, I think you know what's going on. I haven't done anything in a corner. In other words, I haven't whispered anything. Anything I've said out loud so everybody can hear it. There's never questions to what I say. And I don't do anything in a corner. Anything I do openly. So that the whole world, if one person knows what I've done, a whole lot of people know what I've done and what I've said. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know you believe. And Agrippa said unto him, Paul, remember first he said you're crazy, you study too much, you're nuts. When Paul says to him, do you believe, King? He said, Paul, you almost persuade me to become a Christian. You know, that's about the saddest words that anybody can speak. I almost got saved. Go to a funeral. He almost became a Christian. Almost persuade me to become a Christian. And Paul said, I would to God that not only you, but everybody that hears me today would both almost and altogether, such as I am, accept these bonds. He said, I want you, King, and everybody that hears me, not only to almost believe, but to believe and be exactly like me, except I'm chained, I'm in bonds, I'm a prisoner, and I don't want that for you. But aside from my being a prisoner, everything that I have in Christ, I would like you to have also. When he said that, the king rose and stood up, and the governor, and Bernice, the one that marched in and made herself comfortable, and they that sat with him, and when they were gone aside, they talked among themselves. And what they talked among themselves, they said, this man doth nothing worthy of death or of bonds. Same thing Felix said. He's done nothing for which anybody can kill him. He hasn't even done anything for which they can put cuffs on him. Then said Agrippa unto Festus, this man might have been set in liberty if he had not appealed unto Caesar. If this man had not said, today is 5/17, 15, and this is PM. If he hadn't said, I demand to be heard by Caesar, he'd be a free man. Most people would say, well, and he was dumb. He should not have talked the way he did. He'd have been a free man. Paul didn't want to be a free man. Paul wanted to talk to Caesar Augustus about his soul. He wanted to give him his personal testimony. We're going to end here. I'm going to close the video, and then I'm going to chat with the people in my live program at iVlog. But we have gone from chapter 21, verse 20, all the way through 22, 23, 24, 25, and 26. When we come back next Sunday night, we will be in chapter 27. And we will do chapter 27 and 28, and we will be through with the book of Acts. Remember I said to you this morning that there's a book about a slave? It just so happens that that's next on our list. So unless it takes me 2 hours to preach 2 chapters, we might even, although I kind of gave you that story about the slave. Somebody suggested, because the word slave came up, that was racist, as though slaves were black and slave owners were white. And I went on to read how the apostles referred to themselves as slaves. And then I also reminded you that I have a video on YouTube made maybe just a couple weeks ago, qualifications for servanthood, how to be a good slave. That's something, if you really love the Lord, you would probably enjoy reading. But we have gone all but 2 chapters now, and one of the 2 most favorite books of the New Testament, the Gospel or the Acts of the Apostles. So we're an hour and 15 minutes and 7 seconds into this program until our next video. Blessings on you.